I'm at the site of a catastrophe. I'm right at the edge of the west garden here with these beautiful chestnut trees that are 3 years old now. You may have seen this video about the one that's just outside of the shot. And look at how nicely this one is trying to catch up. Well, look at this. Over here, this is one of the chestnuts. Excuse me while I squish a couple of Japanese beetles that are trying to eat the chestnut leaves. This was just as big as that one. Not the giant, but the one that I was just standing beside. It was a little taller than me, just over 6 feet. And now I've had to cut it down here, and this is now the new leader. This used to be a branch, and now this will be the leader. So that tree is either 1 foot tall or about 3 feet tall, depending on how you want to measure it. Courtesy of this swamp maple that fell right here, and this was a relatively easy fix with this chestnut, where all I did was just clip. There was probably still this much of the original stem, but everything had been stripped off of it. And so only the very bottom branch, thankfully, was unscathed. And so I cut just above there, and now thanks to this netting, it's helping to hold it in a more vertical stance to help convince it that this needs to grow up and tall. It's still trying to go sideways, but that's okay. I'll help it some more later. That was easy, and the future should be okay for this, especially because, as you can see, I used 2 kinds of tape at the top to seal it so that nothing can get in there, including, of course, our friend, the chestnut plague, as I like to refer to it. It's not going to get in there. So we'll see what happens with this. I think it's going to be okay. But the real disaster, if you will, happened over here with the pawpaw tree. There are 3 pawpaw trees here in a row at the end of this row of chestnuts. They continue along the same line, as it were. Here in this area that we're on the edge of a little hill here that goes down to the pond with all the frogs that are having their fun. Can you hear them? Playtime Froggy Sandbox. So anyways, this pawpaw is the largest of the 3. Well, not anymore. Not anymore. It was the largest of the 3. I've cut back so much of this maple now that it seems like it didn't get over to here, but it was well beyond here and almost hit the next pawpaw. Thankfully it didn't. This pawpaw had about 30 fruits on it, and I've never in my life tasted a pawpaw fruit. And I've been growing these for 8 years. And I was so excited to see this tree loaded with pawpaws, and it all got destroyed. And I want to show you now what I did to try to save the life of this tree. It's far from certain that it will survive at all, because unlike that chestnut, the bottom branch on this is almost 4 feet off the ground. And it was all stripped. And I've got shading on here, screening on here to help protect the leaves from the sun, because they will not tolerate full sun in this fragile condition. So they need to be shaded somewhat. Not fully shaded, so screening is perfect for that. To give them a little bit of light, but not enough to hurt them. Here on the stem, Again, we can see two kinds of tape. The black tape is just electrical tape. Well, there's three kinds. There's another kind of black that I used on the top. Oh, and now that I see that I forgot to do that on the chestnut. I'll have to go get some and fix that in a moment. That is duct tape on the top that's just acting as a cap to seal it. And then you've got the black common electrical tape, and then this sort of blue-green tape is not tape at all. It's just plastic. It's like a roll of plastic, thick plastic. And I'm using that as a bandage because underneath that, the skin of the tree has been stripped completely off. There was just this little thread of skin that for the upper branch was still connected to the tree, thankfully. But otherwise it was completely stripped off. And this lower branch that is wilting rather badly, the leaves, this skin that connects it was ripped right off the tree. This little tiny branch was just dangling down by this piece of skin that was just hanging, not connected to the tree anymore. So I took a chance. And what I did was I began with that non-adhesive blue-green plastic, let's call it tape. And I did one extremely tight orbit around the intact part of the skin. This is as high as the original skin is intact. Above that, it's a disaster. And I did one loop around there, and then I used the black electrical tape around itself to act as an adhesive to hold it tight. And then I just kept winding it and winding it and winding it and going higher as I went, as tight as possible, until I was able to get that dangling lower branch reconnected. And then at that point, as you can see, I then applied the black electrical tape, the adhesive tape, around that underneath this, and it's actually holding up this little branch. If this black tape wasn't there and doing the job that it's doing, the way that I strung it around like that, this little branch would just drop down. It would not be able to stay up. So this is acting as a support as well as an adhesive to keep it connected to the tree at all. And then once I completed that, I kept going around and around and around to just maintain the connection of the existing skin that's holding the higher branch on. And just for good measure, I did the same trick with it, even though it probably wasn't entirely necessary. But let's face it, we need to do everything possible to prevent any other problems. And so I gave it extra support with the black tape, and then I gave a few more rounds above it with the blue-green non-adhesive tape, and then more black electrical tape, the adhesive tape around that to keep it tight. And then I cut the top, and then I added that other piece of tape to act as a cap over it to stop anything from getting in there, any kind of contamination. Now, this upper branch is responding very well. As you can see, these badly torn leaves here at the end are still standing nice and straight. They're not drooping, they're not sagging, they're not wilted. And so this is still alive. And the first offshoot off of it was largely spared from the incredible damage. And thankfully, the leading tiny developing leaf there that just has a tiny bug bite out of it is otherwise perfectly intact, and hopefully it will continue to grow because the tree needs to recover. And thankfully it had a very good root system, and I've been feeding it, especially when I saw that it was developing pawpaws. So this is very well fertilized, very happy, except for the fact that it's been literally cut off at the waist and everything above is gone. So we'll see what happens. And I haven't given up hope on this lower branch, and that's why I've got so much of this netting on here to protect it from the sun, which is rising as we speak, and you can see it's starting to light it up a little bit. But it's not harsh, direct sun yet, as it would be overhead. And so this protection is here, and that kingbird that you can hear making his noise there, this is part of the reason that I have all this protection here as well. I have netting over it and I've got these perches up here that are now acting as supports for the screening, but it doesn't matter. They were there initially because the insectivore birds, there's a beautiful swallowtail. The insectivore birds love to land on the pawpaws, and they were knocking the fruits off. And so I put these perches here to try to encourage the birds to land on the perches instead of on the actual branches of the pawpaw, knocking off those beautiful fruit that I want to try. And now I won't. Hopefully next year, but I doubt it. Will this tree survive? Who knows? But I'm going to keep tending to it. I'm going to keep caring for it. And it was an emergency situation, so I wasn't going to drag out the camera and try to film what I was doing here. Every second counted. I was here when it happened, and so I scrambled to try to save the life of this precious tree. So when the time comes for me to remove this skin, this artificial plastic skin, I'll make a video and you can see whether or not this worked. And I hope that maybe, if I'm unbelievably lucky, somehow this tree will have a pawpaw on it next year. But there's where it's at. Oh, one more thing I wanted to show is it was skinned at the bottom also, and I had to use tar there to protect the area that's been skinned there. Luckily, it's a relatively minor damage, and it's actually on the part of the tree that was completely stripped above anyways. And so that area is not going to affect its ability to send water up to this one. I'm just jumping in here while I'm editing because I noticed that the footage reveals that the tape is transparent enough that you can see what's happening underneath here. This is the actual stripped area where there is no skin. And you can see that there's liquid there. See all the bubbles? That's actually the liquid that's being transported up by the root system of the tree. We can actually see what's happening here, that the tree is pumping water up from the ground and sending it up to the top of the tree. I just find this unbelievable to see this. And so here we can see that there's some skin on both sides, but in the middle, facing the camera, that's the heart of the tree being exposed, being kept alive by this plastic skin. So, I'm going to now switch to the other channel for those of you who are interested in videos about us as opposed to trees, to talk about the us aspect of this tragedy. So I might see you there, and if not, well, I'll see you in my next tree or music or whatever other kind of video. Okay, I gotta get busy.